Mommy, will the judge make Daddy stop being mean?
Yes, baby, I promise. We're going to be okay.
I never thought a Tuesday morning in family court would be the day I watched my daughter learn what it looks like when a man decides to kill you. Lily had been clinging to my hand since we left the apartment. She was 5, small enough that she still fit perfectly under my arm, and she'd spent the entire ride there asking me questions I didn't know how to answer. Why did we have to come here? Would Daddy be nice today? Would the judge let us go home after? I told her what I always told her, that everything was going to be fine. I believed it a little because I had to. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale coffee. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. My attorney, Patricia, sat beside me in a blazer that was slightly too large for her shoulders, shuffling papers with the quiet urgency of someone who knew exactly how much was at stake. Across the aisle, Jason Hardy sat in a charcoal suit his mother had probably bought him for the occasion, his jaw tight, his eyes already looking at me the way they always did, like I was something he owned that had started misbehaving. Lily pressed her face into my side. She didn't look at him. She'd learned, the way children learn things they should never have to, that looking at him sometimes made it worse. The gallery behind us was sparse. A few observers. A woman in the back row taking notes. And in the far corner, almost out of my peripheral vision, a man I didn't recognize, in a suit that looked like it had been cut specifically for his body, sitting very still with his hands folded in his lap. I noticed him the way you notice something slightly out of place, the way a painting hangs 1 degree crooked on a wall. Something registered, then I looked away. The judge had barely finished his 3rd sentence when Jason's attorney requested a recess. Patricia leaned toward me. Standard delay tactic. Don't react. I nodded. I was good at not reacting. Years of practice. If you're listening right now, I want to ask you something small. My mother and my closest friends told me nobody would care about stories like this, that I'd never reach 1,000 people who actually wanted to hear them. I'd love to prove them wrong. If this story already has you holding your breath a little, please subscribe to Julia's Romance Library. Help me show them that these kinds of stories, the ones about surviving, about being claimed by someone unexpected, about finding safety in the most impossible places, deserve to be heard. Let's keep going. The recess lasted 11 minutes. When we reconvened, I could feel the shift in the room before I understood it. Jason had come back from the hallway different. The careful performance of the reasonable co-parent had slipped, just slightly, around the eyes. Patricia noticed it too. She put her pen down. The judge was mid-sentence, something about a guardian ad litem report, when Jason stood up. Not the way you stand to address the court. The way you stand when you've already decided what happens next. His attorney grabbed his arm. Jason shook him off. Jason, Patricia started. The sound of the hammer pulling back was small, mechanical, almost polite. The courtroom went absolutely silent in the way rooms do when something has happened that the human brain takes a half-second to process. That half-second where everyone freezes, where the air seems to thicken, where the ordinary world makes one last attempt to hold itself together before everything changes. Jason raised the gun.
He was looking at me.
Only at me. The way he'd always looked at me, like I was the source of every problem he'd ever had, like erasing me was a solution. Lily made a sound beside me. Not a scream. Smaller than that. A sound I will never forget. I couldn't move. I'd read about this. The body's response to mortal fear. The way it locks. The way time distorts. But knowing about it and living inside it are 2 entirely different things. I sat there, completely still, watching the barrel of a gun and thinking, absurdly, about the pretzel I had promised Lily we could get on the way home. I had promised her. The bailiff was shouting. Someone knocked over a chair. Patricia threw herself sideways. And then from the corner of the gallery, movement. Slow, deliberate, almost theatrical in its calm. The man in the perfectly tailored suit rose to his feet. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. He simply stood, the way a man stands when he is entirely certain of his own authority, and he looked at Jason the way a predator looks at something that has made the fatal error of forgetting the natural order of things. Then he began to remove his rings. One by one.
Slowly.
The heavy gold sliding off his knuckles with quiet, terrible patience. He set each one on the gallery railing beside him with a sound so soft you could only hear it because the rest of the room had gone completely silent. Jason's eyes moved to him. That was his mistake. Whatever Ralph's face held in that instant, I couldn't name it. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been something I recognized. This was older than anger. Quieter. The expression of a man who has already calculated exactly how this ends and finds the math uninteresting. Ralph crossed the gallery rail in a single motion that shouldn't have been possible for a man moving that calmly, and then everything happened very fast in a way that violence always does. A blur of controlled force, the clatter of a weapon hitting marble floor, Jason's shout cutting off into something much smaller. It was over in seconds. Jason was face down. Ralph's knee was in his back. Ralph's hand was on Jason's wrist with the grip of someone who has done this before, many times, in places far worse than a family courtroom in the middle of a Tuesday morning. The bailiff finally moved. Ralph stood, straightened his jacket, picked up his rings from the railing, and slid them back onto his fingers one by one. Then he walked to me. Lily had buried herself in my arms. I was shaking. I could feel it distantly, the way you feel things that are happening to your body from very far away. Ralph crouched down to my level, which was not what I expected, and his voice when he spoke was quiet enough that only I could hear it. You and your daughter are going to leave this courtroom now. My car is outside.
Get in.
He placed a card on the table in front of me. I looked up at him. His face was composed, unreadable, the eyes of someone who has seen everything and decided long ago that panic was a waste of energy.
Who are you?
I asked. The corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Someone who doesn't like what I just watched happen. Across the room, Jason was in handcuffs, still shouting my name, promising things, threatening things, the vocabulary of a man who had never once in his life accepted a consequence. His voice broke against the courtroom walls and meant nothing. I picked up Ralph Miller's card. I looked down at my daughter, who was looking up at me with eyes full of a question she was too young to articulate. Is it over? Are we safe now? I thought about every bailiff who hadn't moved, every neighbor who hadn't called, every friend who had said, "Are you sure it's really that bad?" I thought about the promise I had made her about the pretzel. I picked up my daughter, held her against my chest, and I followed the man in the tailored suit out of the courtroom. I didn't know then what I know now, that I hadn't escaped a monster. I had simply been claimed by a king. And the terrifying thing, the thing that would keep me awake in the weeks that followed, pressing my back against walls in the fortified apartment he would move us into, learning the names of the men who stood outside our door, was that I wasn't sure yet which one frightened me more. The first ring came off without ceremony. No announcement. No warning. Just the quiet drag of gold against skin, and the soft click of it meeting the gallery railing, a sound so small it shouldn't have carried across a room in chaos. But it did. It cut straight through the shouting, through the scrape of overturned chairs, through the bailiff's delayed, fumbling commands. It carried because Ralph Miller intended it to. I watched him from where I sat frozen, my body convinced that moving would somehow make the gun more real. He removed the second ring with the same unhurried precision. Then the third. Each one placed deliberately, like a man setting down things he no longer needed, like a surgeon removing a watch before he opened someone up. Jason's eyes found him. That was the moment everything shifted. Whatever Ralph's face held in that instant, I couldn't name it. It wasn't anger. Anger would have been something I recognized. This was older than anger. Quieter. The expression of a man who has already calculated exactly how this ends and finds the math uninteresting. He moved. I barely tracked it. One moment he was beside the railing, the next his hand was over Jason's wrist, bending it back at an angle that produced a sound I felt in my own bones. The gun dropped. Jason dropped with it, face against marble, the fight leaving him so completely and so fast that it almost looked like relief. Ralph stood, straightened his lapel, slid every ring back onto his fingers one by one, as the bailiff finally arrived to do a job that had already been finished. He crossed the room to me without hurry, crouched to my eye level, Looked at me, not through me, the way Jason always had, but at me like I was something that mattered, and he was deciding what to do about that. He placed the card on the table with 2 fingers. My car is outside. Then he straightened, turned, and waited. My sister called 4 times before I answered. Patricia called twice. My mother didn't call at all. She showed up, which was worse. She was sitting at my kitchen table when Ralph's driver dropped us off, her coat still on, her hands folded in that particular way she had when she was holding something back that she intended to say regardless. She waited until Lily was asleep. Arabella. Just my name, the way she'd said it my entire life, when I'd done something she considered dangerous. Do you know who that man is? I told her I knew what he'd done. That morning. In that courtroom. While everyone else stood still. She slid her phone across the table. A news article. Then another. Names I half recognized from headlines I'd never paid close attention to: organized crime task forces, federal investigations that went quiet, a rival who'd disappeared 3 years ago and stayed disappeared. Ralph Miller mentioned in paragraphs that were careful never to say quite enough. You traded one dangerous man for another, she said. At least Jason was afraid of consequences. I didn't answer her because part of me was already asking the same question, and I didn't like where it went. The problem was the other part of me. The part that had slept, genuinely slept, for the first time in 2 years the night before, in the temporary apartment Ralph's assistant had arranged while the courts processed Jason's arraignment.
Clean sheets.
A locked door with a code only I knew. Lily in the next room, breathing steadily, not flinching at sounds in the hallway. I kept telling myself it was temporary. A practical arrangement. I wasn't naive enough to believe in rescue. But I caught myself checking my phone for his name more often than I should have. Replaying the quiet way he'd crouched to my eye level. The card placed with 2 fingers, not pressed into my hand, not forced, simply offered. My mother watched my face and understood before I did. That, she said quietly, is exactly what frightens me. The apartment didn't look like a cage. That was the first thing I noticed, and the thing that unsettled me most. I'd expected something cold. Something that announced its own security, reinforced and utilitarian, the kind of place that reminded you constantly why you needed it. Instead, Ralph's driver pulled up to a building in a kind of neighborhood where doormen wore pressed uniforms and the lobby had fresh flowers replaced twice a week. The elevator required a key fob. The apartment itself was on the 14th floor, corner unit, with windows that ran floor to ceiling and let in so much afternoon light that Lily pressed her palms flat against the glass and whispered, "Are we on top of the clouds?" Almost, baby. Almost. The kitchen was stocked. Not generically, specifically. Lily's brand of apple juice in the refrigerator. The particular crackers she ate when her stomach hurt. I stood in front of the open pantry for a long moment, trying to decide how I felt about being known that carefully by someone I had spoken to for less than 4 minutes. Ralph arrived that evening. He didn't stay long. He walked the perimeter of the apartment the way men like him apparently walk all spaces, cataloging exits, sightlines, vulnerabilities, and then he stood in the center of the living room and explained, without being asked, what the security detail outside the door would and wouldn't do.
They're there for your safety, he said.
Not mine. I asked him what the difference was. He almost smiled. You can tell them to leave. They'll leave. He said it like it was simple, like that distinction settled everything. And the worst part was that it almost did. I felt something in my chest loosen by precisely the amount it shouldn't have. After he left, I stood at those floor-to-ceiling windows with Lily asleep against my shoulder and the city spread out below us, glittering and indifferent, and I thought about my mother's voice. That is exactly what frightens me. I was starting to understand that she wasn't just talking about Ralph. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you're tuning in from. I read every single one. Share your thoughts, your own experiences, anything on your heart. And if you haven't already, please follow, like, and subscribe. It truly means the world. Now, let's keep going. He told me on a Wednesday, which seemed like an odd day for a confession. He'd stopped by to check on the security rotation. That was what he called it, what he always called it, as though the visits were administrative and nothing more. Lily had fallen asleep on the couch with a picture book open across her chest. Ralph stood in the doorway of the living room looking at her for a moment longer than was strictly necessary, and something moved across his face that he didn't bother to hide quickly enough. I brought him coffee. He sat, and in the particular quiet of a sleeping child and a city muffled 14 floors below, Ralph Miller told me about a little girl named Sophia. She would have been 7 now, he said. She had her mother's mouth and a stubbornness, and a laugh that could fill a room 3 times the size of any room she'd ever been in. His wife, Camille, had been trying to get him out, had almost convinced him, he said, which he believed was precisely why Marcus Reyes had moved when he did. A rival who understood that the fastest way to destroy a man was not to come for the man himself. He said it plainly. No performance of grief. No request for sympathy. Just the facts of it, laid out with the same quiet precision with which he did everything, and somehow that made it worse, the composure of someone who has carried something so long that the weight has simply become the shape of him. They were gone before he reached them. That was all he said about the night itself. I didn't offer condolences. I sensed he hadn't told me for that. I sat across from him in the silence and let it exist between us, without trying to fill it. After a while, he looked at Lily again. Nobody, he said quietly, was there to intervene. He didn't look at me when he said it.
He didn't need to.
I finally understood that his obsession with protecting us had a shape. It was the exact size and weight of everything he had already lost. The envelope was slipped under the apartment door sometime between 2 and 3 in the morning. I only found it because Lily had a nightmare and I'd gotten up to sit with her, rubbing slow circles on her back until her breathing evened out again. On my way back to bed, I saw the white edge of it against the hardwood, almost luminous in the dark. No name on the front. No return address. Just a photograph inside, Lily and me, taken from a distance, leaving the building 3 days prior. Her hand in mine. My head turned slightly, caught mid-laugh at something she'd said. Someone had drawn a circle around her in red pen. I don't remember sitting down on the floor. I just found myself there, back against the wall, the photograph in both hands, the apartment suddenly feeling like something that could be unmade very quickly by people who knew what they were doing. I called Ralph at 3 a.m. He answered on the second ring, already awake, already alert in the way that told me he didn't sleep the way ordinary people slept. He arrived in 11 minutes. Looked at the photograph once, handed it to the man behind him without a word, and crouched in front of me on the hallway floor, the same way he had in the courtroom, eye level, steady.
This won't happen again, he said.
I asked him how he could promise that. He held my gaze for a moment, and in it I saw the answer he wasn't going to say out loud. The one that lived in the part of his life that existed in headlines that were always careful not to say quite enough. Trust me, he said instead. By morning, the 2 men Jason had sent were gone in the way that certain problems, in Ralph's world, simply went. No explanation offered. None requested. His security detail outside our door quietly doubled, and nobody mentioned what had happened to warrant it. I told myself I was grateful and left the rest of the question alone. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment and tell me where you're tuning in from. I love hearing from you. Share your thoughts, your experiences, anything at all. And if you haven't already, please follow, like, and subscribe. It means everything. Now, let's continue. The courtroom was the same one. I hadn't realized that until I walked in. Same fluorescent hum. Same smell of old wood and stale coffee. Same gallery with its rows of indifferent oak benches. My body knew it before my mind did, a cold wave moving up from my feet, my hands tightening around my folder of prepared statements, my breath shallowing in a way I had to consciously correct. Patricia touched my elbow. You don't have to look at him. I knew that. I'd practiced it. 17 times in the mirror of the fortified apartment, addressing the middle distance, voice level, the facts delivered without the tremor that Jason had always counted on. That small fissure in my composure, he could wedge himself into and widen. I took my seat, folded my hands, and, before I could stop myself, I looked at the gallery. Ralph was there. 3rd row, center. Still in the way, only he was still, not rigid, not performing calm, Simply a man entirely at home in his own authority, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes already on me when I found him. He didn't nod, didn't gesture, just held my gaze for a moment with an expression that said everything his stillness always said. I'm here. Nothing will happen. Begin. I turned to face the court, and I began. I spoke for 40 minutes. I said Jason's name, without flinching. I described specific dates, specific rooms, specific sounds Lily had made on specific nights, and I kept my voice even through all of it because I had promised myself he would not hear it break. Not here. Not in this room where he had once raised a gun and believed that was the end of a story. Jason's attorney objected twice. Both times I waited, reset, and continued. When it was over, I walked back to my seat on legs that were steadier than I expected. I didn't look at Jason once. I looked at Ralph, and Ralph looked back, and that was enough. If you've made it this far, thank you, genuinely, for staying with Arabella's story. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. Share your thoughts, or anything this story has stirred in you. Please follow, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, we're almost at the end. Let's finish this together. The envelope he gave me this time had my name on the front. Not Arabella Hardy. Just Arabella, written in handwriting I was learning to recognize, precise, unhurried, the penmanship of a man who did nothing carelessly. I opened it at the kitchen table while Lily ate breakfast, and I sat with its contents for a long time without speaking. Inside was a letter of enrollment confirmation from the university's medical program. Tuition marked paid in full. A start date circled in the same pen that had written my name. Behind it, a second document, legal paperwork for a name change already filed, already processed, bearing a judge's signature at the bottom. And behind that, the deed to a property in a neighborhood I'd driven through once years ago and quietly cataloged as the kind of place I would never live, filed under a name that was mine but had never yet belonged to anyone's fist. I heard Ralph's voice from the doorway. You mentioned it once. The degree. You said you'd been 2 semesters away when you married him. I had mentioned it once. Months ago, briefly, the way you mentioned things you've stopped believing in as historical fact rather than living want. I hadn't thought he was listening that carefully. I looked down at the enrollment letter. At the name printed at the top, clean, uncontested, belonging entirely to no one but me. Ralph. My voice came out smaller than I intended. This is, I can't accept. It isn't charity, he said before I could finish. It's correction. He took years from you. These are some of them back. Lily looked up from her bowl. Mommy, are you crying? I pressed my fingers beneath my eyes and laughed, which surprised me. No, baby. I'm just reading something good. She accepted this completely, the way children accept things when the adults they love seem genuinely okay, and went back to her breakfast. I looked at the deed again. At the name on it. For the first time in longer than I could measure, it felt like mine. He came on a Sunday, which felt intentional. Sundays in the new house had become their own quiet ritual. Lily drawing at the kitchen table, the radio low, the particular unhurried light of a morning with nowhere to be pressing soft and gold through windows that were finally, irrevocably mine. I had started to recognize peace by then, not as an absence of fear exactly, but as the gradual loosening of something I had held clenched for so long I'd forgotten. It wasn't just the shape of me. Ralph knocked. He always knocked now, which still moved me in ways I didn't say out loud. He sat across from me at the kitchen table after Lily had been persuaded, with the bribe of a new set of colored pencils, to take her drawing to the living room. He set a small box on the table between us. Dark wood. No ribbon. Nothing performative about it. I looked at it for a moment before I looked at him. I'm not proposing, he said, which almost made me smile.
I want to be clear about that.
Then what are you doing? He opened the box himself and turned it toward me. Inside, a ring. Simple, substantial, nothing like the diamond Jason had used like a brand, like a deed of ownership pressed onto my finger in front of witnesses. This one was different in a way I felt before I could articulate. A single band, warm gold, with a weight to it that suggested permanence, without demand. Jason gave you a ring that meant you belonged to him, Ralph said. I want you to have one that means something different. That means no one will ever touch you or Lily again. Not while I exist. I didn't reach for it immediately. I sat with it the way I'd learned to sit with things Ralph offered. Without rushing, without deflecting, letting it be real. Then I picked it up, held it in my palm, felt the weight of a promise made by a man who had never once said a thing he didn't mean. I didn't put it on. Not yet. But I closed my hand around it, and I kept it. If you've made it all the way here, thank you. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for walking Arabella's entire journey with me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from, and let me know what this story meant to you. Please follow, like, and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support is what keeps these stories alive. Until the next one, take care of yourselves,